So what is faster at video encoding? This iPad Pro here with the latest M2 processor in it, or this MacBook Pro here, which has got the older and technically slower M1 processor in, although that has got an M1 Max processor in it? Well, to find out the answer to that question, I'm going to be doing an export speed test within DaVinci Resolve on both of these devices, and let's see which one actually does it the fastest. I will also be doing a very similar video to this shortly once Final Cut Pro comes out for the iPad, and what I'm going to do with that is compare Final Cut Pro to DaVinci Resolve, doing pretty much the same thing, a video export speed test. And don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you like it as it plays through, and a sub to the channel will be absolutely awesome. So just to kick off with, here is the setup for my iPad. So basically I've got a USB-C hub which gives me HDMI output for the iPad, also allows me to put power into the iPad. I'm then connecting the iPad to my monitor, and also I've got my Ninja in between to record the video, and then I'm just using a mixture of Bluetooth mouse and keyboard. Okay, so as we can see, I am on the iPad, and if I just come up to the top right, we can also see here that I am on external power. And as we can see there, this is telling us that this is an iPad Pro 11-inch 4th generation, so basically M2 iPad. Now I'm just going to show you here that the only app that is active is DaVinci Resolve, so nothing else is running in the background. So let me just get into Resolve here. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is the project setup. So go to project settings here. As we can see, this is UHD 59.94 frames per second. Basically, this is 4K 60 FPS. So we'll come out of that. Now, as far as the media in the timeline is concerned, let me just go to the inspector and let me just go to the file properties. As we will see here, this is Apple ProRes 422HQ. It is 59.94 frames per second, and it is 4K UHD. So basically, the media is matching the timeline here. And of course, I am using ProRes here as well, or more specifically, ProRes 422HQ. And I will explain why that is at the end of the video. And then as we can see here, the file is located on my iPad. So the folder that the file is in is on the iPad itself. Now, I'm just going to come down here to the export tab, and I will set up the export. Now, whatever I do here as far as the export is concerned, I'm going to do the exact same thing when I flip over onto the MacBook Pro. So what I'm going to choose here is H.265. Now, I'm just going to call this test output. And as far as the location is concerned, I will put it back into the same place where I've taken the file from. So essentially here, obviously what I'm doing is reading and writing back to the storage on the iPad itself. I will explain that as well at the end of the video. Now, as far as the codec is concerned, I'm not overly concerned about the audio. I'm not going to go in there and change any settings. But as far as the video is concerned, what I'm going to do here is choose QuickTime as the wrapper. Obviously, I've selected H.265. Now, the resolution and the frame rate are matching the timeline, which in turn are obviously matching the media as well. Now, if I come down here, I'm going to go not restricted. I'm going to put this on 100,000 kilobits per second. Now, don't forget, this video is a speed test video. It is not a quality video. However, what I will do is kind of do a split screen of the two encodes at the end of the video to finish off the video, and I will explain some of the problems with doing that at the end of the video. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is untick optimize for speed, and I'm going to do this as a multi-pass encode, and I'm going to leave it at main 10, which is a 10-bit output. Now, it is completely unnecessary to use a 10-bit format for standard dynamic range video when uploading to YouTube. However, because I tend to record mostly in 10-bit, I just tend to export everything in 10-bit regardless of what the destination is. And if you want some information on the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit as far as whether it's necessary or not for YouTube, there will be a link to a video in the description below, and I'll probably have it at the end of the video as well. Okay, so that's all the basic settings taken care of there. So I'm going to add that to the render queue, and then what I'm going to do is click on render all. Now, obviously, as this starts rendering, we are going to get a progress up here as to how far it's into the render. but importantly, at the end, it will give us the actual number or the actual time for how long that this render has taken. Now, if we have a look up here, what we're seeing are the amount of frames being rendered at this point in time, or at any given point in time. So as you can see there, we're anywhere between whatever it was saying, 29, and it's going up to like 37 frames per second and stuff like that. I'd say on average, it's probably in the region of 30 frames per second. So what we're seeing here is something that is taking twice as long to encode the actual frame rate that is in the timeline. But don't forget here, this is 4K 60 frames per second that I'm exporting here. Anyway, what I'm going to do is let this just run through this first pass and then onto the second pass, and then we will see how long the render is actually taken to do. Okay, so as we can see here, the total time taken was 4 minutes and 14 seconds. Now, don't forget, this was a 2-pass encoding. So if we just halve that down to a single pass, that would have been a little over 2 minutes. So basically twice the length of time to encode as what the media in the timeline was. So effectively, on average, about 30 frames per second on the encoding. And don't forget, this is 4K 60 frames per second. Of course, if you were doing something like 1080p at 24 frames per second, it would export a lot faster because the amount of frames being exported per second would massively increase beyond what you've just seen here. Okay, so I'm now over onto the MacBook Pro here with its older and supposedly slower processor. So what I'm going to do is just give you the overview of everything here, just so that we can see that everything is once again like for like. So I'm going to go to the settings. Again, as we can see, this is UHD at 59.94 frames per second, essentially 4K 60. Come out of there. And if I switch on the inspector and if I go to the file, once again, we can see it's the exact same file as well here. And just to refresh you, this is an Apple ProRes 422HQ file with a frame rate of 59.94 frames per second and a resolution of UHD, essentially 4K 60. Okay, so once again, exactly the same file. Now, this particular file, although it's not telling me here in the inspector, is it? This is actually located on the actual internal drive for the MacBook as well. And obviously, I'm going to export back to the same location, which in this instance happens to be the desktop because I'm dead messy. And then I'm going to go to the deliver page here, and I once again set up the export identically. So H.265 is what I'm going to choose here. Now I'm going to go to browse. Now I'm going to put this in the same location, which if I have a look carefully here is going to be my desktop where all my junk goes to. I'm just going to call this, in fact, will I get away with test? I'm highly likely to already have a file called test. Hey, no, I haven't. Okay, so test. Going back to the desktop. Now, this is audio once again. I'm not bothered about the audio. It has no impact whatsoever on the export. In fact, saying that, the actual wrapper makes no difference either, but I've just left it on QuickTime, so we're like for like here, so we're on .mov. And once again, it is UHD 5994 frames per second, essentially 4K 60. Now, what I'm going to do is come down here. I'm going to restrict the bitrate to 100,000 kilobits per second, so it matches the previous export. I'm going to untick optimize for speed, and I will put on multi-pass encode. Once again, this is going to main 10, which is 10-bit. Again, just to overemphasize, it is completely unnecessary to upload 10-bit to YouTube for standard dynamic range recordings. 10-bit and 8-bit will make absolutely no difference to anything, and there is a video that I've done that proves that. Now, I'm going to just bob that over onto the queue here. Now, don't forget, on the previous export from the iPad, we were roughly around 30 frames per second for the actual frame encoding. Now, check this out. So, render all. Okay, so that's going off and doing its thing. And then immediately we're up to, what's that, 97 frames per second. Okay, so we can see straight away there that this is definitely going to be faster and by a big margin as well. In fact, let's see. Yeah, I will speed through this because although it is going to be quicker, I'm just going to be trying to pad this out with useless dialogue. So let me just go and speed this up. Actually, just having a quick look here, we are now over 100 frames per second when it's doing the actual encode pass. So the analysis pass was actually a little slower, but the actual encode pass is actually bumped up to over 100 now. Anyway, I'll just carry on speeding this to the end. Okay, now as we can see here, that entire 1 minute encode took 1 minute and 15 seconds, which is massively faster than the over 4 minutes that the iPad had done there. And just as I'd mentioned with the iPad export, the same thing applies here with the MacBook Pro export. If this project or timeline with its media had have been, say, a lower resolution and a lower frame rate, for instance, say 1080 at 24 FPS, then this output speed would have been way faster. Okay, so the results for this video may not have come as a big shock to some of you out there, because really an M2 iPad Pro is never going to be as good as a MacBook Pro, even with the older M1 processor in. Now, even though this has got an M1 Max in it, if you were to use a basic M1 processor, you're still going to get better results off that on any kind of Mac device as what you will do compared to the iPads, and there's a number of reasons for this. However, let me just go into some of the things that are very pertinent and important to understand about this video. So the first thing to explain here is the choice of codec for doing the test with. Now what it is, both of these devices have got media encoders and media decoders built in. Now when you come to test an encoder, the best way to test an encoder is to feed it information faster than what it can handle it. So therefore you are always maxing out the encoder. So to max out the encoder in this instance, both of these devices can read and then stream ProRes into the encoder really fast, and indeed faster than the encoders can handle it. So the reason for using ProRes here was because both of these devices will be having their encoder stage maxed out by the input. Now there's going to be some people out there who are going to be thinking, but hold on a minute, Dave, you were not even using filters or anything in this test, so do we really get a fair representation of the speed of the encode? Well, actually, if you start putting things like filters on the video, you are going to slow down the encoder, and the reason why is because both of these devices, after a certain point, their processing power will not be fast enough to keep up with whatever it is that's going on in the timeline if you are using things such as filters. So once again, the reason for not using any effects or anything like that is because that would have slowed down the timeline processing, which in turn would have slowed down the data going into the encoder. So therefore, we would not have got the fastest speeds that the encoders are capable of encoding at. Now, the other point to make really clear here, which definitely is something that can affect these types of results, are where you read the data from, obviously the video file, and where you write it back to during the encode. Now, I've done extensive testing between using external Thunderbolt SSDs and the internal storage on both of these devices, and it did not make any difference whatsoever as to where the data was being read from and as to where it was being written back to. So even if that video file was on an external Thunderbolt SSD but being written to the internal storage on both the devices, or vice versa, or any combination, the speed test itself was not altered by any configuration difference. So basically what this means is the internal storage for both of these devices is well fast enough for reading the data and writing it back to at the same time. So with those two main technical points explained, why are we seeing such a huge difference? Well, I think the bottom line here is simply this. Any of the M processors that go into the likes of the iPads are never going to perform the same way as they would do going into a Mac computer, either a MacBook Pro or any laptop or one of the desktop devices. And probably the main reasons for that are things like thermals and heat, and also battery life. So when you put a processor in an iPad, you've got to be really careful about the amount of heat being generated. And also the iPads are going to have to last probably a lot longer than most other devices, because they always have been really good for battery life. Now, in order to get that to work correctly, I can't see Apple allowing any of these M processors to run as fast and as powerfully as they possibly can do. And we get to see that when we look on MacBooks and also Mac desktop computers. Those M processors, even going back to the M1 processors, are absolutely fantastic. But as soon as you put them into an iPad, it's not exactly the same thing. Now, another thing that I've observed using my M1 iPad Pro as well as this M2 iPad Pro against the likes of, say, my MacBook and also other Mac devices that I've had, like desktop devices, and that is the way that data is handled as well externally, or rather the speed of the data. So although we are using the exact same chipsets between the iPads and the Macs and whatnot, as I've just stated, the problem is when it comes to actually data transferring between external fast devices such as, say, an SSD on Thunderbolt and plugging it into the iPads, doesn't matter whether it's M1 or M2, those bit rates that you get in those data transfers are nowhere near as fast as what they are on, say, the Mac devices. Now, that one to me is a real big surprise, because I wouldn't have thought that there would have been too much stress on the actual system itself or the system on chip if Apple had just left all that stuff to do with the interface and for data to run as fast as it can. However, there definitely is a difference. Now, on top of that, also, the iPads definitely are not running at the same speed internally as far as their storage is concerned. Don't get me wrong, they're really fast and they can handle certain tasks really well. Although, that may also have been something that could have been affecting this particular test. It may well just be that the internal storage could have been a bit of a bottleneck here as well. That's something I'm going to have to try and test in a little bit more detail. Although the problem with trying to test these things on iPads, it really is quite difficult to do proper measurements for speed tests as far as the data bandwidths are concerned for its internal storage. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of other stuff I could bleat on about here, but I think the point of this video has been made really clearly, and it doesn't matter what you think is the cause of these things. The simple fact is the iPads are just simply way slower than what the MacBooks are or any of the desktop devices doing a like for like thing. And obviously you can't get much more like for like than putting DaVinci Resolve on both of them and having a piece of software that definitely utilizes the actual media encoders properly. Anyways, the last thing that I'm going to do here is what I said I would do during the video, and that is to compare the two outputs created by these devices. Now, I must say right now, this is totally wrong. Now, the only reason why I'm doing this is because inevitably there will be people in the comments section asking questions about the quality. Now, let me just make something dead clear here. What you don't do to compare quality is to do two separate encodings, then re-encode them again and then upload them to YouTube. I mean, you could argue and say, well, actually, both of the encodings are going through the exact same re-encoding phase and what have you, so maybe that is the leveler here. However, if you're going to do something like compare one encoder to another, ideally what you should do is upload those two videos separately so people can observe what they look like with only one stage of extra encoding applied to them. Because don't forget, what I'm about to do now in order to do the split screen is going to add another layer of encoding on top of something that was already destructively encoded. Because don't forget, we are working with interframe codecs here, so the amount of concatenation going on here is actually too much from my point of view. However, because people will always ask about these things, I'm going to do it anyway. Anyways, if you've liked the video, give it a thumbs up. A sub to the channel would be awesome. There'll be links in the description to stuff that I've used in the video. I'm David Harry. Thank you very much for watching this video. Take care and goodbye now.
Kill confirmed. Secure enemy tags to confirm the kill. Hostile UAV active. подтверждено. Standing by. Secured the kill.
Reloading.
Kill confirmed. Secure enemy tags to confirm your kill. Orbiting the area. Hostile UAV active. Confirmed. Enemy KIA. UAV подтверждено. UAV standing by. Secured the kill.